round up geopoliticists. Round up the geopoliticidal cream, deworming the politics bros. Because I like pretending influences can be influenced. Continuing my ongoing mission to completely alienate all my Substack readers and avoid having to grovel for paid subscribers. Non-business business situation. So I thought a series of short notes today could form a whole post. And I don't like AI generating my audio. Thank you very much. I like hearing people's real voices and their humour as well. Let's see if we can make this funny without being too funny. I've got the Donbas today. A bit of history. 151 days in New Zealand Watersiders lockout of 1951. Something about Ai Slop from getting annoyed by Kulinksi again. And a redux on my ideas about strong government. Authoritarian, non-authoritarian government. No, you say it the other way around here. Non-authoritarian, authoritarian governments. Russia, Ukraine, then Mr. Andrei's deworming needs. So, not my favourite topic. It's quite polarising, and no side of the war, I think, seems very good to me. And my consistent overview take on the Donbas situation has been that the tankies simply have no moral grounds for their argument that it was legitimate for Putin to launch the military action. Or how do you say it properly? Putin, to launch the military action. However, I regard it as pretty normative and correct in some universal moral sense. Not moralistic, but decent, ordinary morals. That taking up arms to protect the innocent is legitimate. Why the hell would it not be? It doesn't mean you have to kill people. Taking up arms to protect the innocent. Mr. Putin and the Russians should, however, never have abandoned the UN and diplomacy. No matter the decrepitness of the UN Security Council, and no matter how painful it is to watch as the people of the Donbas were being terrorized by their own government and its thugs. And no, Mr. Martyanov, war is not diplomacy by other means. Good Lord, why does everyone still borrow their wisdom from dead, fetid, brained men who wore a lot of shiny objects on their chests, or who grew long beards and wrote boring tomes on fictional macroeconomics? Anyway, today I was listening to Andrei chatting with Nima, and he was going off on his usual rant about how the NATO alliance is metaphorically dead and finished. Partly that is because they are presided over by utter nincompoops. No argument there from me. Andrei's a bit of a character. Comes across to me sometimes a little bit too might makes right sort of sentiment. I don't know. I don't know what's really swimming around in his pool of mental qualia. And I'll sometimes give him the benefit of the doubt. I guess, no doubt he's a Russian patriot, and I can't begrudge him for that, I guess. The Russians have historically been completely condescended to by the collective West, and Russophobia, it is a thing. It's quite funny though, isn't it? Because Russians are also well known for being pretty anti-Semitic, so it's like you get what you deserve, or what goes around comes around, sort of thing. Is that the correct expression? What you throw gets thrown back at you. That's what I mean. So one could fully agree with Andrei that the top leadership heads are imbeciles. He's talking about the West mainly. He thinks the Russians are actually smart and know how to solve differential equations for their logistics. Dude, operational research is a solved science. But anyway, he should be more circumspect, I think. Plenty of them, especially the more deeply embedded neocons and finance/tech elites, I don't think are so stupid. Every war or suffering that's met upon the working class is an opportunity for them. I think they like to see all this chaos. In fact, doesn't DJT actually openly admit that he likes the chaos. Never let a crisis go to waste. And you can say that these elites will suffer ego chastisement or egg on face and all that. But I ask you, whenever has egg on face ever bothered a psychopath? To think that it has any impact is massive projection on your part, I would say. You are thinking as if you were POTUS or the NATO Stan chiefs. Well, if only you were. Well, if you were, you'd probably be a psychopath, wouldn't you? You shouldn't want to be in government. If you find yourself in government begrudgingly and as a duty, or oh my God, I can't believe I got elected. Or firstly, that'd be a bit of a miracle given our current, electoral systems just don't allow people who don't want to be in government to be forced to serve in government. But we should force people to serve in government who don't really want to be there. By force, I mean gently push. Okay, I don't mean whip their ass and threaten them with violent torture if they don't serve in government. I just mean, we have a better electoral system if the people who we are voting for on the roster are basically people who don't really want to be there, but who have all the qualifications for being there in serving in government. Oh, okay, that went off script a bit. Anyway, so Andrei's apparently beloved, wise, authoritarian strongmen are not going to get us out of all this. That's a decrepit Ayn Rand type of thinking. Take your favourite strongman. I don't know who it is. Whatever. I would say Xi of China, right? Xi Jinping. The reason Xi is so strong is because he has some form of love and respect from the Chinese workers. That is the base of his strength. Now, he could be better, which is to say the Chinese worker could be even better. It's the source of your strength that needs to improve, that will improve your strength as a leader. Because the Chinese worker could easily, they've still got room, a lot of room, to have even more raised class consciousness, I would say. The whole point of class struggle is to eliminate the class so that there is no more struggle. Okay, now you knew this was coming. I am a dirtbag MMT after all. So one reason, I don't really know. I'm just suggesting this as an opinion. One reason I think that Andrei gets things a bit off, at least it seems to me that he gets things a bit off at times, is that he has no comprehension whatsoever of the monetary system. Same for Scott Ritter. Same for all of these other, former conservatives who have found a conscience. They still don't understand the monetary system. They're still basically, Austrian scholars in some form or another. So he and Nima and Danny Haifong and all the rest of these brainworm geopolitics bros, I say that affectionately, okay? They're still under the illusion that governments need to find the tax credits before they can spend. You've got to say it that way, find the tax credits, I think, rather than find the money. Because money is not really well defined according to most people's brains. You could take the time to explain it, but just say it directly. Just say, does government need to find the tax credits? People will fill in what you mean. You mean the money. So do governments need to find the tax credits before they can spend? Well, no, obviously not. So what is it about then, funding these wars? Are they losing money? Are they running out of money? No. The war can literally go on forever, just maybe at a slower, grinding pace. Wars have never stopped because the governments ran out of money. They stopped because, the horror of it all, basically, the total waste of human lives. All quiet on the Western Front type of stuff. So, in our times, I guess the Azov battalion guy is just waiting around for the next NATO shipment. So, slows the war down a bit. Is that a good thing? Well, it's neither good nor bad. Whether war is fast or slow, it's still is still terrible. It's still unnecessary, still totally pointless and waste of human lives, no matter how fast or slow it is. So anyway, waiting for the next NATO shipment is all that the Azov need. And if there is no truly diplomatic resolution, then the Azovs will just be going guerrilla, I reckon. So still no real end to the underlying cause of war. That's not a prediction that I ever want to be correct about. I would hope that there's a diplomatic solution that removes any justification, rationale, motives for anyone wanting to become a Nazi fascist. You remove the causes of terrorism rather than, or what am I saying? Rather than anything else. Sorry, my brain just froze there for a minute. Like, what's the alternative? Education, I guess, right? You can educate people to not want to be fascists, but you've got to look at, you got to study the psychology of fascism, figure out why people go that way in the first place. And a lot of it, a heck of a lot of it, is economics. They're scared of jobs, they want strong men to protect them. They'll resort to a kind of militaristic, strong nationalism in order to, well, I think it's false, but it's their belief, in order to, give them jobs and stop them from starving, essentially, because that's what the neoliberals are going to do. They're going to starve you because they don't understand the economics. Well, neither the fascist nor the neoliberal understands the economics. They're both just sort of a spiral of death, really. You've got to get out of that spiral, MMT. Not that MMT gets you out of the spiral. It's the knowledge that enables you to think of ways to get out of the spiral. In fact, MMT gives you so many ways to get out of the spiral that I reckon actually MMT knowledge is close to getting out of the spiral, because it's like very hard to see how not to get out of the spiral if you understand MMT, if you know what I mean. So anyway, so the true horror of all this stuff should, I think, be palpable to you. The warmongering governments and the reactionary conservatives who fashion them as lapdogs, fashion our governments as their lapdogs, are only limited by the real resources. But the real resources are a flow problem, not a stock problem. The stocks can always be replenished with sufficient flow, and there's always flow. There's always military production going on. So it's just a matter of time before you can drop the next bomb. But you can always drop the next bomb. As every good post-Keynesian and MMTer knows, this is quite horrific. Don't confuse the flow for the stock. So please don't tell any of the decrepit world leaders that they have no problem ever finding the money. Maybe keep them in the dark and ignorant. I don't know. No, that's a kind of that's a terrible joke to tell. I should rewrite that somehow. I don't know. You want decrepit world leaders to be ignorant, but since they're the world leaders, you don't want them to be ignorant, because you want them to guarantee jobs, full employment, remove the fundamental cause of fascistic tendencies. But it's a bit of a catch-22 there, I think. The decrepit, even if they know they don't need to find the money, they're going to pretend they don't. They're going to pretend they can't find the money in order to tax you and me to quote-unquote fund the war, or to fund free healthcare, or whatever stupidity it is that they want to use for maintaining class hierarchy. But anyway, please do tell everyone else, because instead of war spending, we need sustainable jobs, spending for public purpose, peace and prosperity. The governments can always undertake such spending. It's not about their capacity to spend, it's about their willingness to spend. Make them know this. You and I must make them know this. If they don't know it, how can we blame them? So there's some huge majority rank of society that needs to know the MMT knowledge. Even if you're a horrible person with terrible politics, it's still better to know MMT than not know MMT. You've got to remove people's irrational arguments, basically, or remove the false paradigms and false consciousness that allows their false arguments to gain any credibility. And I think there's an order of operations issue here. The mass of the working class need to know that the government can never run out of the score points. Before the decrepit leaders know this, right? Because you don't want the decrepit leaders to be endlessly funding wars and lying to the people that for the other things like free healthcare, housing, education, public transport, they can't find the money. You don't want them doing that kind of double game. Because the leaders, in fact, never really spend like drunken sailors for public purpose. But they will spend on the war machine and on handouts to the parasitic financial and tech sectors. They'll spend like drunken sailors, in a targeted manner. So not so drunken. They'll spend like very cunning sailors who are total capitalistic pigs. So government net spending, aka fiscal injection, is not the problem. The problem is always, what is it that is being employed? What are we doing? What is being employed when the government spends? It's not about the amount of spending. It's what is actually being accomplished. That's the question. That's the question for your democracy. It's also not an inflationary risk. It's an affordability risk. Affordability, which has nothing to do with inflation. If you think it does, you've been gaslit and propagandized, if you think otherwise. So more spending on war and government interest payments is what creates the inequality and affordability crisis. It's not an inflation crisis, though. It's an affordability and inequality crisis. Why government interest payments or government bonds? Well, because that's basic income, but only for people who already have money and in proportion to how much money they already have. Now, that can generate inflation, but inflation is not the problem. The problem is the affordability and inequality. Once it becomes inflation, it's no longer a problem because the prices have all re-gauged. Inflation is never a problem. The price of a loaf of bread is irrelevant. What's relevant is how many loaves of bread your whole annual salary can purchase. That's what's relevant. The real wage, not the nominal wage. I wasn't going to talk about inflation today too much, but the issue is how you get to the inflation or re-gauging of the price level. Because there is hysteresis, because there's a lag, and the wage price tends to lag behind the commodity prices, that's the problem. That is not an inflation problem. It's an affordability crisis, a hysteresis crisis, because the government policy has not made the fiscal adjustment necessary, which would be to raise the minimum wage or provide a job guarantee and handle the fiscal counter stability that way. Anyway, not today's topic. So, for heaven's sake, all you geopolitics bros, stop getting trade backwards. Chinese factory workers are the slaves of the US importers. They're the golden goose laying the golden eggs. So here's a thought. Maybe you neocons should just keep letting them lay those golden nuggets, right? Did it ever occur to them? Who's really driving trade policy backwards then? Well, it's your export oligarchs. They've propagandized everyone to think that exports are a really good thing. Well, no. Their concern is for supporting the foreign buyer, not supporting the domestic worker. They want to crush the domestic worker, lower wages. They want the foreign buyer to have more purchasing power because that's their export income. The oligarchs, the export oligarchs. But they are not your government. The government trade policy should be to crush exports, crush them to an absolute minimum, and increase imports as much as possible. Of course, that's an international war between nations to fight to who gets to have the most imports. But of course, it's a fight that we don't have at all because no one understands this, or no one apparently seems to understand international trade. They've all got it backwards. They're all thinking about getting the money instead of getting the real goods. And those are completely the reverse problem. So if you're thinking about how to get the money from the foreigners, you're going to get things completely backwards. So why are your so-called patriots wanting to eliminate your lovely Chinese slave labor? I mean, sounds a bit cringe, right? But, that's essentially what it is. Of course, if that was the motive, if your motive was to get rid of Chinese slave labor, then I'd say, well done, muchas gracias.
非常感谢
Thank you from a Chinese worker who can now import US factory worker relics instead of the other way around, rather than the reverse, in other words. Although it's now highly debatable, if things change in that way, whether the Chinese workers will ever want to import any US goods. Why would they want to? They're already producing superior quality products, I'd say, most of the time, over most sectors, I think. Well, except for maybe some helium. USA still has basically the world's supply of helium, I suppose, and that would be really cool for doing awesome cryogenics, condensed matter physics research. What else? What other good is helium for? I don't know. There might be some niche uses I haven't remembered. Anyway, the main point here being international trade is a simple and easiest, dopiest way to maintain peace and harmony among the nations. I say dopiest as in, any idiot could think about it. Not that it's bad, it's just, the most simplistic thing you could think of, right, is to have trade. If you're depending on someone else for getting some nice goods that you want, are you going to go to war with them and threaten their shipping lanes? I don't think so. But if you all fail to comprehend the purpose of trade, that it is to get the real goods, not to get the currencies, then war may needlessly persist forever. Tragedy of epic proportions. Albeit maybe at slower rates of the bombings if you get a bit short on the real dynamite resources. Next topic, 151 days. The New Zealand Watersiders lockout of 1951. So I was trying to get some work going for organising macroeconomic justice demands from our New Zealand government. Bit hard to do. There's not many job openings in that area at the moment. But I figured that while the National Act Tories are in charge in New Zealand, it's a good time to prepare for when they are not in charge. But no decent labour organisation movement is going to employ a dirtbag MMT and physics geek like me. So I've been doing some unpaid volunteer, puny little things here and there, better than doing nothing. And one of them was I decided I would typeset Dick Scott's, New Zealand historian, his history of the 1951 Watersiders lockout. So there's a link to that down in the Substack here. And I just wanted to make a couple of points for some non-Kiwis. Point number one, the Watersiders. Oh God, I'm getting tired of reading this out. Guess I should persist. So yeah, here's some highlights, or lowlights, whatever. The Watersiders were savagely betrayed by the New Zealand Union leadership. And that was coming from the Federation of Labour, FOL. They're a bunch of pro-capitalist, anti-worker, anti-communist wankers. You can file that under no boss is good, just some are less bad than others. New Zealand communists were darn nice people. They were likened to Soviet totalitarians or sympathisers, which was really the exact opposite of the truth. I mean, maybe some of them loved the Soviet Union, I don't know, but if that's the case, they were a bit naive. The New Zealand communists were really nice people. I think if they had known the truth about the Soviet Union, they would have been disgusted. But if you corner workers like rats, then these very decent, loving people will defend their own, like a mother who's watched too many Sigourney Weaver alien films. No, seriously. Point number 3, the Watersiders, the seamen, the coal miners, and other unions, they had good strategists. But these were workers. The workers were the best strategists, not the union bosses. These workers had incredibly strong nerves and moral fibre. Their wives and children were being starved by the New Zealand government. It was made illegal for neighbours, for example, to give the Watersiders and their families food. Point number 4, the newspapers were among the most evil bastards. The shipping owners locked out the Watersiders, okay? The workers wanted to go to work and they found that they were locked out. It was not a strike. But the press deliberately published lies and propagandised the New Zealand public into believing that the Watersiders would stop work striking to starve the country and destroy democracy. It was an organised effort by capital and the press, the newspapers and journalists, to do this. And it was basically a form of Red Scare. I don't know if it was legitimate or not, but certainly people were scared of the communist threat, I guess. And it's beyond my historian powers to really make a judgment of people on that, about any of that. Maybe some of them were legitimately scared of being overtaken by socialists. I don't know. But anyway, it was what it was. The lies in the press, the distortions, were still distortions and lies. That doesn't change that. It's part of the story. Point number 5, if you think that work is bad and that your UBI is good, then you're a damn cretin. Just think about the history. It's an incredible struggle that these people went through. They were men and women who won a class war action against Kiwi fascists because they knew the value of their labour. And I think the lessons that this history can teach us are very much still relevant to today. And the reason I spent an entire evening the other day typesetting the notes that I found into a nice LaTeX form instead of solving quantum gravity, because I was just too lazy to wait for the library to open and find a copy. So I put the link up, and there's a documentary online that you can watch if you don't like reading. It's only about an hour-long documentary, so pretty quick. I recommend that bit of history if you don't know about it already. Next topic for today, Ai Slop, Kulinski's continued Thatcherite propaganda. I had a look at one of Kulinski's recent videos, or at least the first few seconds. There's a lot of righteous anger in his comments section on his channel. I wrote a comment, usually, one of my normal multi-sentence comments, but it got scrubbed. So I don't know why. Some censorship going on there. So I wrote basically my comment up again on the Substack here. I think, Kulinski's reportage is sort of okay some of the time. He's got the right tone, I think, and several facts are true. Why do we have to make such qualifications these days? The more AI slop and fake news and all that we get, the more our language is going to become redundant. I think it's going to be like a weird linguistic period in history. Because once you have to say, no, this fact is true, the very next day you're going to have to say, this fact is true, and I know it's true, and I have proof that it's true. And it's like, it's going to be this no never-ending thing just to say a simple thing like, this is a fact. No, it's a true fact. As opposed to yours. Anyway, he gets a few opinions, really badly off, I think. But, not that anyone else listening would understand. It's off to me as an MMTer. I'm pretty much sure that I have a lot of bad things too in my writing, of course, So I'm just critiquing Kulinski from an MMT point of view, that's all. I can correct a few things if I think they're off, right? Doesn't mean that everything I say is good. So he parades this looming AI apocalypse as an apocalypse, capital A. But I see it's quite the opposite. It's more like a springtime of recovery of some sort of sanity, I reckon. So I would hope. But there's no telling how dopey the techno-materialists can be, propping up all the hype. AI, singularity, a new era in human consciousness, in machines, blah, blah, blah. I think that hype will keep going for quite a while. But yeah, the raw reality of energy economics is starting to kick in, I think. So, portfolios will adjust. There'll be some big losers, but equally some big winners. There's always a Nassim Taleb or someone, Black Swan, betting against the bubbles. But to me, that's all superficial, elitist wankery. I mean, it neither increases the inequality too much, that I worry about, nor does it decrease it substantially. It does not cause any more unemployment. It does not substantially cause any nicer employment. So I think partly Kyle is wrong about many of his fears. Machine automation is not an unemployment story. Unemployment is an unspent income story, not a productivity gain story. I think, why don't people understand this? If you gain productivity, the only consequence of that is that labour now doesn't have to work so hard on these silly jobs. That's all that happens. It doesn't mean anyone is unemployed. You just stop working for that shitty boss. That's a good thing. So, yeah, very few political commentators seem to realise this. But, isn't employment supposed to be basically the number one political economy issue of all times, of any time, of all ages, of any age? I mean, if you're promoting your channel or your Substack under political economy, maybe it's a good idea to understand unemployment first, before anything else. So why is every political commentator and his dog completely inept and not only getting unemployment wrong, but virtually getting it entirely backwards? I mean, we're truly living in the political dark ages still, like astronomers pre-Copernicus. So to Kyle and Crystal and all their fans, if you dare to read or listen, first, stop parroting the right-wing Thatcherite myths. The government can always employ all idle labour with decent living wages for public purpose, since none of it is taxpayer funded. Not a dime. When government net spends, this is what funds the taxpayer, not the other way around. There are people, though, who are funded by the taxpayer. Who are they? They're the private firms selling the goods to the taxpayers. They're the ones getting funded by the taxpayer, not the government. I do agree with Kyle that the machine learning algorithms and Ai Slop is poisonous. It poisons the planet. That's the server farm industrial wastage. And it poisons people's minds, deep fakes, all that sort of stuff. Slop in the classroom, etc., etc. However, no one forced you to watch online video. It's easy to find reputable news from independent sources. And yes, the government should regulate so that authentic journalism is basically licensed in some sort of way, some sort of non-AI slop guarantee. And guess who knows how to make such standards happen? The good old folks in the industrial metrology labs, actually. ISO 17025 people. It's basically blockchain. As much as that might surprise you, it's blockchain before there was blockchain. I forget when ISO 17025 was instituted, but international metrology standards, traceability of measurements, goes way back to the needs of shipping in good knows what century. But, standardized time has always been a thing. I don't know when the standard length and electric charge and all sorts of other measurement units came about. I used to, but forgotten. But, it's really old. We had that stuff sorted out a long time ago. And, it's been improving over the centuries and decades. Now, I've got quantum mechanics and the speed of light and Planck's constant basically forming a lot of measurement standards, fundamental technology. Anyway, those kind of people have ideas of how to form guaranteed chains of certifications. That's what you need for journalism. Also, fake advertising's been around since advertising has been around. So it's not really a new crisis, except maybe a crisis of consumer gullibility. It's also not an educational crisis either. What the schools and the teachers fear is their own ineptitude and the failure of the neoliberal educational paradigm. Well, fucking good riddance to that is all I can say. Or maybe I can say a little bit more. Like, for example, the free school movement is pretty immature, but it shows you that what true education and learning can be like. No machine systems can adversely affect the free school. When you have teachers as mentors and guides, the children will rapidly learn what is slop and what is not. School kids under neoliberalism, by contrast, are wise, I think, to use the AI bots to quote-unquote do the homework. They did not ask for the homework, you establishment teacher cretins. So why are you complaining that they're using the AI to do your homework? Anyway, yeah, have a look at free schooling, and I think you'll see that the AI is not an educational crisis at all. It's a good thing, perhaps, because it will maybe cause some social pressures to drive parents to maybe think about trying to get their kids into free schools. And when there's more demand for free schools, I'm pretty sure the supply will expand to meet. Here's a free tip. If you can't taste it, at least afterwards, maybe don't buy it. Extend that analogy for yourself, okay? I'm not going to spell it all out for you. Yeah, also get outside a bit. You don't have to consume news online. You don't have to even subject yourself to any deep fakes. When the roboticists can deep fake enough real life persons to fool you, then I'm pretty sure we're already dead. I mean, think about the energy required to do that. It'd probably burn the skies. Now, I say that as a bit of a sort of an exaggeration. You know, I'm not doing any back of the envelope calculation about energy usage and all that. It's more a moral attitude to me, not just a physics concern. You know, like, we're already spiritually dead if the technologists feel the need to create real life persons. You know, if we actually get to that point where we're thinking we need robots as companions or whatever, then we're spiritually dead. So, you know, or we're living on Mars, whatever it is. We've sort of really given up our humanity in that case. So, you know, I think that's a needless fear, because I think that's just science fiction. I don't think we're ever going to get there. There's too many good people in the world, and all the headlines in the media and all the fear mongering, all that's top level superficial stuff. And I think you should just, you know, be wary of that stuff. That there are terrible people in the world, as the 1951 Watersiders lockout will convince you about if you were too naive to understand before. But, you know, they're not most people. It's the sort of rotten apple type of thing, I guess, or is it? It's not the rotten apple, because that's rotten apple spoils the bunch. I mean the exact opposite. It's like more like, you know, there's a rotten apple over in this barrel, and this other barrel over here, everything's good. So, you know, maybe just don't mix them. That's what I'd say. Anyway, but if you have any numbers on how the server farms could actually burn the sky, you know, really lay waste to the environment, then, you know, let me know. But I don't think we'll get there. It's a legitimate concern, of course, but I think, yeah, too many good people in the world to actually get to that particular apocalypse, I would hope. I don't know. On that previous point, I would say make your news and politics local. And it works, because the world is not a siloed machine system. We live in a society, and your local politics will spread slowly, like seeds, if it's good. If it's good, it'll spread like seeds. If it's not, it might spread like fire and lay waste, lay waste to the political ground. I mean, the stuff that spreads rapidly, virally, is the stuff you should not be looking at, because that's media cancer. So take notice of the things that go slow, is what I would say. Slow, local, good wholesome stuff. Don't let your hair catch on fire so much. All right, the last topic for today is strong government again. So in case I was unfairly misconstrued in a previous Substack post, I just wanted to write maybe slightly less humorously, a bit more seriously about the idea of strong government. So strong government is the smaller government, but not in the libertarian way, okay? Not libertarian small government. I mean more like, we don't really need that many people in government. That type of small government. And that's because a strong government does not need to be big. What they do need to be big on is fiscal. Okay? A strong government needs to be fiscally big. Why? Because most people will be working in the public sector, obviously. But on what? Teaching, healthcare, all that kind of thing. The other stuff, the police and the justice system and all that sort of thing, it has to be there. Justice is the most important thing. But it can be very minimal in terms of resource usages when your government enjoys the love of the people. And even more so when the government, metaphorically, is the expression of the love of the people for their own community. I did not say that the Chinese government was weak. I said they were pretty strong. At least I think I did. I may have written that the wrong way around. I don't know. Anyway. Okay, but they're strong not because they are big in any militaristic or police sense, but because China has more democracy than almost any other comparatively sized nation. And their leadership enjoys the respect and tolerance, if not quite the love, of the people living in the region of China. That's why they're strong. Government does need to be strong so that the innocents can be protected from private plunder. That's the legitimate role of government. Governments that protect the interests of private plunder, on the other hand, are illegitimate and also extremely weak, regardless of how much police and military power that they flaunt. Police and military power is not the source of a government's strength. It's the source of their weakness. Whenever they need to deploy the police and military, you've got a weak government or weak society. On the last point, on planet Earth, we have never seen a legitimate conservative Tory government. Never. That some conservative Tory administrations, quote-unquote, win their vote is a facade. When the quote-unquote democratic vote is skewed by propagandists, it is perhaps a civic duty, nevertheless, to maintain the rule of law. But because if you don't maintain the rule of law, you're screwed when your guys get in power, when the good guys get into power, okay? So rule of law is not the bad thing. But under an illegitimate conservative government that have been voted in by propagandized masses, it's by no means an obligation to like your government, nor to deny the rights to opposition and civil disobedience. Because legitimate patriotism is best seen, I think, in love for your wider community. It can even be extended to the whole world. That's what true patriotism would be. The whole world, including all other species and whatever. I don't know. Maybe I'm taking the definition of the word too far there. I don't know. I'd just say that patriotism is not unconditional love for the government or the nation. I mean, the government must earn respect and love through actions. That's when patriotism becomes legitimate. The next point is that China is more democratic than the rest in the West, hence less authoritarian, but is by no means yet a workers' paradise. So what is a workers' paradise? Well, whatever it is, it's not utopian because there are still workers. A worker's paradise, I think, is when no one is working by coercion, but everyone is working at something they love. I think I can leave it just as simple as that, right? How to get there is the big question. But it's not utopian. And it's not a pipe dream. If people remain greedy and selfish, then yeah, I think it would be utterly utopian and in fact impossible, because I've just defined it to be impossible. But I don't think we are locked into a state of nature where people necessarily need to be greedy and selfish. Because despite all the flack that those abundance guys get, the underlying idea is actually correct. We do live in a world of abundance, but, we don't have anywhere near enough justice. If we had fair, decent justice system, then no one would be living in want, poverty, and unemployment. So the greedy and the selfish are people that we don't need. We can eliminate them. It's not utopian to think we can. It's an education problem. It's a generational long struggle, but I think it can be done. And I believe that history shows you that we do make progress in that in many ways. I think the neoliberal era has been retrogress, perhaps, in many ways. Although, yeah, I don't research that and have numbers on it, but I think it's probably a pretty good case that could be made that over decades, long periods, we can go backwards in terms of there's more greed and selfishness in society. But the thing is, the point I want to make that maybe, I don't know, agrees with those abundance guys, the point I would make is that, there's no fundamental need for people to be greedy and selfish, because society at the moment, modern civilization, does have the capacity to produce things that everyone, to afford everyone a pretty decent standard of living. In any case, it's not rocket science to evolve towards people being less greedy and less selfish. It's a science of motivating people to think less stupidly science. But actually, my last comment was that might be actually harder than rocket science. I don't know. It's not something that I seem to be very good at. I do try to teach and educate people, but maybe I'm better at doing that with mathematics and physics than I am with MMT and economic justice. Well, I hope that's inspired you to actually go out and stop listening to me and do something to help. I won't read out the footnotes, but you can read them if you like on Substack. Please copy and reproduce anything that I write if you like for your own purposes. Reuse, rehash, make it funnier, make it less rude and impolite. And just spread the knowledge out there, please. That's it for today.